Hello again, YouTube. It's Michael from Mirrors of Consciousness and creator of the Orbifold Tarot. Continuing on with our series of short lessons on Orbifold basics, we've looked already at the four elements. We've looked at each of the numbers, an overview of the numbers, and we've looked at each of the numbers individually from 8 to 10. And we've applied that now to reading with just the pips, just the minors, in some small readings, some 3 and 4 card readings, starting to see how elements combine. I'd like to continue with that idea of combining elements now to explore an idea that's fairly common in tarot, but it can be a little bit confusing at times, and that is elemental dignities. It's not actually really that confusing, it's just I think sometimes it can be explained in a confusing way, and partly that's just because different people have different views on how they see the dignities, how they see the elements, which is perfectly valid. I generally don't see the elements, even oppositional elements, as necessarily being conflictive. They can be, but they aren't necessarily. So a good example of that is fire and water. Fire and water are definitely seen as ill-dignified, is the tarot term for that. Because, of course, we all know fire and water don't mix. Well, they do, though. Water actually absorbs, if we think of fire not only as fire plasma, but if we think of fire as heat, water absorbs heat, and it absorbs a great deal amount of heat as well. Not only does water absorb heat, but heat also creates steam. Heat, when water is heated, it creates steam. So it's a transition between elements from water and fire to air as well. Fire is dispersing water into the air. Another thing about fire and water, while I'm on it, is that although, yes, water can put out fires, and that's certainly ill-dignified, unless, of course, you want the fire to go out. Sometimes a situation is so volatile that you actually want some water there. You want to put out the fire. You want to kill the fire. But at other times, maybe you don't want to kill the fire, but you may want to temper it. You may want to kind of cool the heat down. And again, that's not necessarily fire as fire, but fire as heat. And so water then can cool that heat down, can kind of provide some balance to heat. So that's an elemental look at fire and water. But how does that also pertain to us and our daily lives and how we're reading tarot? We're usually not reading tarot about actual fire and actual water, although we could be, because we live among the elements. We're looking more into tarot as how are these elements showing up within ourselves? How are they representative aspects of ourselves? When I get angry at something, it's not that I'm actually on fire, literally, or when I feel calm and cool and introspective or reflective about things, it doesn't mean that I'm covered in water, although, again, I certainly could be. Bath time is a great time for reflection and all of that kind of stuff. But you see what I mean, where the elements are representatives of stuff that's going on within us. And so fire as action, or fire as doing and doership, can actually work and get along really well with water, which is feeling. So feeling and emotion and intuition and the subconscious and feeling things, sensation. So fire and water in the body, in our person, can actually be really well dignified, not ill dignified. So that's just another way of looking at the elements. There's just always these possibilities. The elements combine, and when they combine, they just make a new thing. It's not necessarily good or bad. So that's the primary ill-dignified combination, or what's seen as ill-dignified combination of elements. The second ill-dignified combination of elements is earth and air. Seen partly just because they're oppositional. Air is the most subtle of elements, it's the lightest of elements. Earth is the most dense of the elements. And when earth is there, air is obstructed, right? Anything that's dense, air is obstructed. Whereas with fire and water, air can be slowed down by water. Air can be challenged and changed a bit by water, but it's usually not blocked. It's usually not stopped by water. Fire and air tend to get along fairly well. Fire and air are usually seen as dignified, well dignified, because they get along. Fire adds to the air. It aerates things, like I was saying before about fire and water. Fire creating steam out of water, dissipating water into the air. So you could see that as fire is adding to the air element. It's transforming water into air, in a sense. And so fire is aiding air. That's what it means by fire and air are dignified. They aid each other. By the same token, air can aid fire. Air can be the fuel for fire. It can heat fire up quite a bit even. When you blow on a campfire or an ember, it burns hotter, it burns brighter because of that oxygen. It's using that fuel to burn brighter. And so that's what they mean by those two elements being dignified. However, air can also snuff out fire. We blow out candles. Not everyone does. Some people believe that to blow out a candle angers the fire deities, and so we don't blow out candles. We snuff them or let them burn out naturally. That's a different view. But just naturally and kind of casually, air absolutely can snuff out air. It can actually kill air in the same way that air can kill fire, in the same way that water can kill fire. So even though those two elements are dignified, usually, they can be ill-dignified. When there's too much air, it can suffocate fire. And this is, again, if we use the elements as metaphors for our behaviors and our experiences, this is true also internally. If you have lots of great ideas, that can lead to lots of action and doing lots of great things and passion and inspiration and illumination, and then that inspiration and action and doership can then lead to greater ideas, and they can really bounce back and forth really well. However, sometimes people get too many great ideas. They're too overwhelmed by their thoughts, sometimes their wisdom, sometimes their intellect, and sometimes just unfiltered or disorganized thoughts can also kind of kill fire. It can actually lead to a lack of action. There's so much going on in the mind and in the thought realm, in the air realm, that it actually stops the person from being driven, being passionate, being active in their pursuits. So those two elements, although they again are normally well dignified, they can be ill dignified. And similarly, too much fire can actually burn out all the oxygen. If you have a room that has no oxygen in it, and the fire is burning and burning and burning, and there's not quite enough air, then fire actually it does a disservice to air, or they don't get along well. It again snuffs out the fire. So if there's not enough thought, if there's not enough ideas, if there's not enough air realm material, then no matter how much drive and action and force you have, it'll burn out. It won't go anywhere. It'll die. So that's, I should have done air and fire first, but fire and water are the ones that we can kind of usually relate to the most. So that's air and fire and water. Since we're kind of going down the elements in a way that way, let's go, oh, and we also did air and earth, sort of. Let's go to the last sequential combination, which is water and earth. So water and earth are also seen as well dignified, usually, because, well, I mean, look at our planet, our Earth. The surface of our planet is primarily earth and water. They get along well. Earth provides boundaries for water, but it also provides a reservoir. It provides a container for water. Water provides a vehicle for Earth. So when Earth needs to be moved, it can be minerals and sediment are dissolved in water, and water takes Earth to different places and redistributes the earth and the minerals and the nutrients and the material there. So in the natural world, earth and water are well dignified. You know, when we water earth, things grow and plants grow. Plants are seen also, at least in my opinion, are also earth. They're in a way they're the combination of earth and water, and of course fire and air too, sunlight and heat. So I mean, plants in a way are a combination of all four elements, just as we are also a combination of all four elements. But plants are kind of the result, the more immediate result of earth and water. So earth and water are well dignified in that sense. But as I said, that earth can direct water, water can also, earth can also obstruct water, like in a dam or a break wall in oceans and things like that. And in such cases, earth and water can fight. So even though, yes, we can control water to a fair degree with earth, with density, the power and the weight of water itself can actually overcome that. You know, a big tsunami or big hurricane can just totally obliterate a very strong and stable and solid earthy structure. So they can be ill-dignified as well as dignified. In ourselves and in our interpersonal relationships and in our lives, same thing. You know, emotion can overwhelm us to the extent that we run out of resources, or we lose our being, we lose touch with our ground, we lose touch with our being, we're washed away by water. And it's not that we don't have enough earth that we're washed away. Sometimes, in fact, it's so much earth that when the flood comes, it's really powerful and overwhelming, and that's what causes us to be washed away. So again, there's a dignity and there's an ill dignity in that combination. Earth and water also in ourselves get along, though. I talked about the ill dignity in ourselves, but not so much the dignity. Dignity, when earth and water are dignified in us, when they're balanced, water soothes and nourishes earth. Water, just in our bodies, in our cells, in the way that our nutrients flow. Water as blood, as the fluidity and the fluids of our body, they actually carry minerals and nutrients and nourishment through our body and to the more solid structures in our body. They also wash away debris from the solid structures. When cells die, the bloodstream washes that back through, and then it's filtered through the kidneys and out through the urine and all that. So that's an instance of water and earth being well dignified, just at the body level, not even in our interpersonal levels. I think in the Elements and Meditation video, I talk a little bit about water, the feeling realm, the sensation realm, as being the bridge between action, either moving out of being, out of presence, into action and thinking, or feeling and sensation as the bridge moving back down into being, sinking back into presence when you feel that you're lacking presence. So that's again an example of a way that water and earth can be well dignified when water is helping you be grounded, when feelings and sensations and emotions are helping you move more deeply into your being. That's a good dignity of those two elements combining. And similarly, when we do feel overwhelmed emotionally, being more present, not letting ourselves be swept away and washed away by that flood, being more grounded, being more earthy, being more solid and persistent in our presence, in our being, helps soothe that emotional or sensory overload. Now we have a couple of other relationships. So we talked a little bit about air and earth. I would like to say just a little bit more about that same thing. Too many thoughts or too much mental activity can unroot a person. It can, in the same way that too much mental activity or too many thoughts can kind of quash desire and will and drive, too many thoughts or too much mental activity can also unroot a person. It can take them right out of being, from the being realm and the presence realm into the thought and fantasy realm, which, you know, those are all nice. Thoughts and fantasy are great. Things don't happen without fantasy. We kind of have to imagine things before they come down into reality. But that can also lead us out of reality, out of our being, and there's much more about that in the meditation and the elements video, which I'll link there. But you get the idea that they can very easily be ill-dignified. At the same time, they can be well-dignified. A good, solid plan, as we looked at actually just in the last video where we looked at some elemental combinations in draws, in actual card combinations, a good solid plan, a well thought out, intellectual, logical situation can then actually gain ground, can gain presence, can not only lead us more deeply into our own presence, but can manifest physically into practical, tangible results, which is very earth-like, earth quality. So, and merging practicality with the fantasy realm can be a really great combination. That's where imagination and invention come up. So, you know, all of the great inventions that we use and are practical and are part of our lifeblood in society, even things as simple and archaic as the wheel, which actually is a really important connection for later, for the majors, but even something as archaic as the wheel is that same idea of imagination and creativity at the thought level seeking its way and finding its way and resulting in a very practical and tangible earth level, earth realm manifestation. So there's two other elemental combinations left, which are earth and fire. So earth and fire are traditionally not really seen as ill-dignified, but not really seen as dignified. They're kind of neutral. They're seen as not really getting along, but not really hating each other. Again, I can see that, but I can also see situations where they are ill-dignified and when they're dignified. For instance, so I mentioned that trees kind of grow out of the earth, or plants grow out of the earth. A tree, a good solid, sturdy tree, which provides firewood, is the fuel. So earth, in a sense, is the fuel of fire. And coal, which comes out of the earth. Most of the fuels that we generally use for fire are actually of the earth realm, or of the dense, solid realm. Of course, oil, gasoline, those kind of more watery elements, because water isn't just water, it's fluid, it's liquids, can also be fuel for fire, and well, so can air. So they can all actually fuel fire, earth too. And just in the same way that air can blow out fire, in the same way that water can douse fire, earth also can snuff out fire. If there's a fire burning, one of the ways is snuff it out, and you put dirt on it. Hopefully the dirt's not too dry, because if it is, it will, of course, ignite. But if the earth is dense enough, if there's enough of it, and there isn't too much air in it, then it will snuff out the fire and kill the fire, no problem. But at the same time, earth can be fuel for fire. So there's both aspects, and similarly, in terms of what those elements represent and are metaphors for, the being process, the presence process, can actually make us wiser, not from a thought level, but from a real being, physical level, can make us wiser and clearer about our actions. So earth and fire can really merge well together in us, so that our actions are grounded, our actions have purpose, our actions have yield results. Um, that's where fire and earth combine together so that it's not just action for the sake of action, or acting out every whim as it might be in the air realm, or acting on sensations and feelings, but acting in such a way that there are tangible results, or acting rooted in being, rooted in presence. Um, those kind of actions will tend to have fewer repercussions. Um, so that's where earth and fire combine really well. But again, like the other ones, being too rooted in practicality, too rooted in presence and perseverance, can actually cause fire to die out. If the earth is too dense, if we're trying to build a fire with clay, even if it's dry clay, the clay will usually not actually burn. It'll get fired, it'll get tempered, but it won't actually burn. It's too dense for fire to consume it, for fire to overtake it. Now, again, it can combine really well. It's how we harden a pot. When we fire clay, we harden a pot and temper it, and then it's usable. So that's just to say there's flip sides. There's two sides to everything. And then finally, air and water are also somewhat ill-dignified. They're not really in cahoots. They don't really help each other out, but they're usually not seen as antagonistic or protagonistic to each other. However, again, they can really build on each other. A hurricane is air and water, and it's the combination of the power of both of those forces that give a hurricane its power and its destructive quality. So, but destructive, but it can also be positive. Steam as water and air, yes, it's produced by fire, but really, at its essence, steam is water within air. So steam powers so many things, and steam can be really positive, but you can get, because of the fire element, you can get burned by it. So, sorry, I'm not being as clear about the combinations of water and air. In an elemental, in a kind of pseudo-scientific way, but again, it's just to illustrate that they can combine well, and they can combine poorly. In ourselves, similar thing. We can actually avoid physical sensation and feeling and our emotions by thinking, and thought actually is one of the ways that the physical body, physical sensations, avoids being felt. So that mixture, that combination of air and water in the body as thought and sensation, excuse me, as thought as sensation, is ill-dignified. At the same time, air being the conscious mind, water being the subconscious mind, they work really well together if we can merge the conscious and the subconscious really well in a balanced way, in a way that's brought into awareness or brought into being. So these are just different ways to look at elements and look at elemental combinations. Whenever two cards are side by side with each other, look at, yes, absolutely, you can look at, is it ill-dignified? Is it dignified? No problem. But look deeper than that. Look beyond that. And don't just follow the rule of this is dignified, this is ill-dignified, because, or neutral. Because really, in a way, they're all, if they're not neutral, they all have their dignified way of interacting, and they have an ill-dignified way of interacting. And it then depends also on the proportions of those elements and the situation we're in question, right? So far that's only two element combinations, but I want to stay on two element combinations because next we will look at court cards, and court cards are two or singular element combinations, and it's really important to understand your two element combinations in order to understand the court really well. So up next, the court cards. Stay tuned. Talk to you soon.